This is the e-learning podcast, episode number 38.
I think most people who are listening, they have a message to share. They have a method that works. They have some expertise that other people could use. They have something that other people want to learn from them. And creating an e-course or e-learning is one of the ways to do that.
Welcome to the e-learning podcast from lmspulse.com. My name is Stephen Laddick, and I'm the director at LMS Pulse. My very special guest this week is a celebrity in her own right. Esther Jacobs started as a journalist, and in her storied career has raised millions for charity. She's appeared on European Survivor. She traveled to more than 100 countries, and she's been knighted by the Queen of the Netherlands. In her current chapter, Esther has self-appointed herself as the no excuses lady to focus about a cause most of us could likely get behind, which is how to write a book. In this page turner of a conversation, Esther and I talk about the many faces of Esther, the causes she has rallied around, and why helping people write their books is a way to synthesize all of her adventures as well. We also talk about the importance of self-expression and developing your own voice as you tell your story and as you create educational content. We also talk about the variety of approaches available for book writing as an educator, including the many different types of books you can write. And by the way, have you considered letting your classroom write the book for you? We finally talk about the techniques that make Esther worth her no excuses lady tagline, which she can use to help you, starting with pointing out a mistake you're likely making right now, which is not writing a book. Also, check out the description of this episode for Esther's no excuses checklist. Now, before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The e-learning podcast is sponsored by the e-learning Success Summit. Learn from more than 40 experts how to teach, work, and learn online without being overwhelmed. Get your free ticket to the summit at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And lmspulse.com, your best source for news, information, and resources for e-learning professionals for more than 10 years. Get our free roundup of the week's top news at lmspulse.com.
Hello, Esther. Welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here.
Esther, I see that you're sitting, in a kitchen somewhere. Where do we find you today, sitting in the world?
I'm in a 30 square meter tiny house apartment in Amsterdam, the Netherlands.
I love Amsterdam. I have not been there for now, really thinking about it, probably 20 years. I think the last time I was actually there for the turn of the century in year 2000. So that's quite that was quite an interesting time. They really know how to do firecrackers there. We're recording this at the bottom of November. If people who are Americans, they're about to celebrate Thanksgiving here in 2020. I start every interview with this question: is how's your COVID been? What's it been like, and what have you been doing?
Well, it's mostly been interesting. I've been watching the world around me, and of course, many people are very impacted by it. But I'm location independent, so I can be wherever I want. So I've been in places where COVID hit really hard. I've been in places where it was quite liberal, in places where people are scared, where people are taking and seeing opportunities. So I've been around, and it's a little bit different. Of course, I'm wearing face masks and taking tests, but airports are empty, airplanes are empty, and actually traveling has become a lot easier and faster.
Yeah, I hear to that. My family, as everybody who knows who's been listening to this podcast, my family transitioned from Thailand to Mexico this year, and so traveling it's radically different. I used to be a person who'd get on an airplane, at least 2 or 3 times a month as a consultant, and it was always packed, and the big lines and this and that. And I've seen some of your pictures on your blog where it's like, hey, wait, this entire airport is empty. It's crazy. Tell us about why that is. Introduce me to Esther. I don't want to butcher who you are. People call you the no excuses lady. Why do we call you that?
Because I see opportunities where other people see challenges or problems. And I've demonstrated several times to turn some of these challenges into like big projects and successes. One of the things you mentioned, you were in Amsterdam around the turn of the century. That's when the euro was introduced. And I collected all leftover foreign currencies, foreign coins for charity. And I managed to collect 16 million euros. without any experience, without any expenses, without any organization or network, just by being creative and inventive and not stopping when everybody says it's not possible.
And so what you just said, like, hey, give me all your Deutsche Franks and or Deutsche Marks or whatever they were, and these kinds of things. Like what? Like that's an interesting story. Maybe we'll save that for another time. What other things? Like I saw on your bio, you did European Survivor, and
Yeah.
you've written like 30 books. Like what else about you?
Yeah, I seem to land into different adventures. So for this charity project, I got knighted by the Dutch Queen. And then I tried to make it more transparent what charities spend their money on. And the charities weren't very fond of that. So it was a really difficult time. And I became very frustrated. And one day I heard an advertisement like, this is the last day to register for Survivor. And without thinking, I registered. And 3 weeks later, I found myself on an uninhabited island in Malaysia. So that was an experience. And then when I came back, I decided I didn't want to work with charities anymore. And I continued traveling and giving presentations. And at one point, I needed to renew my passport. And I found out that the Dutch government didn't recognize me as a citizen anymore because I traveled so much. So basically, I got fired from my own country after having been knighted.
That's the thing. You can like lose your citizenship and
nobody knew that, and technically it's not possible, but it happened to me. So every one of these adventures I give presentations about, and then people ask me to write down my stories, and I write books. And I found out how to do that like really fast and effectively and easily. And ever since, I've been helping other people to write down their stories as well, because you must know as a podcast host that there's so many stories, so many beautiful experiences, beautiful personalities, and not everybody expresses themselves so easily. So I've made it like my passion, my goal to help other people to share their stories better, whether it's in a book or an e-course or a presentation or a workshop. And that's what I'm doing.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that introduction. I want to talk about this is what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about why is writing a book important. I mean, most of the people who are listening to this podcast right now, as you know, they're professors or they're in higher education, or there's many people in K through 12 as well. And to get that doctorate, there's the dissertation. So many of them have written a book. Most of it, was massively, deep research or action research or different types of let's just say a long time, right? Usually it takes a long time to get that dissertation out. Your process is, a couple of months. Let's go through just like, let's put it on the table. We're in the age of e-learning, even with a vaccine, online learning and blended learning is going to be, this is the new normal, right? Being able to switch in and out and meet your students where they are is absolutely going to be essential. Where does a book fall into this, and why is it important?
Wow, where to start? First of all, I think most people who are listening, they have a message to share. They have a method that works. They have some expertise that other people could use. They have something that other people want to learn from them. And creating an e-course or e-learning is one of the ways to do that. Writing a book is another way to do it. And people have different ways to absorb that knowledge. A book they might read in the train or on an airplane or at home on the sofa, or they may listen to an audiobook. And an e-learning environment is logging in and actually watching a screen. So there's different audiences, different ways of absorbing the information. But also I think they can stimulate each other. They can enrich each other. So if you already have an e-course or an e-learning structure, that's easily translated into a book. And the other way around as well, if you would write a book about a topic or you have a dissertation, you already have the structure to create an e-course. And then both would, help each other, would help the person learning the topic and, would help the cross sales.
Sure.
And if you have a book or an e-course, it's also easy to create a workbook. So then you have 3 things and you can sell packages and people can learn the information in a way that suits them best at the moment that suits them best. Plus, we know that many people are offering e-learning facilities right now. And if there's courses about the same topic by different people, I think a person who has a doctorate or has written a dissertation, but also who has published an easily accessible book will have a better, status than somebody who hasn't done that.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Uh, Tell me about, okay, so if I'm thinking I'm the professor right now who, she is teaching physics 101, or he is, doing chemistry 101 or public speaking 101, like these, where there's already sort of a book that's been written, this is the thing where it's a standard textbook. Is there, would you recommend, or have you seen examples where even in that situation where, gosh, there's just, we've already got the book written, it's already here, we're going to teach the class. What would you do in that situation? Is it create a workbook? Is it create a whole new text? Like where would that fall in?
It depends. If you have a special method of teaching that specific expertise, then you could create a book or an e-course about that specific method. Like maybe you use a certain example or a certain setting, or you do something with history combined with this topic, or you teach people with disability, or you teach women entrepreneurs, or, that might be a different angle. Creating a workbook is always very easy because you take the questions from the book and the exercises from the book, and you create a new book with lots of blank space, and then you have a workbook.
Sure.
And also for teachers, maybe I'm just thinking out loud. I always learn a lot when I'm writing a book because I'm doing research, I'm talking to people. So a way for students to really get engaged with the subject is also maybe to write a book together. You could write a book with your class, and each group of students has to write a certain chapter. And that means they have to dive into the topic. They have to discuss with the other groups, where does your chapter end? Where does my chapter begin? And in the end, you also have a tangible result that the students will be really proud of. They can show to their parents. It's something you can show to your next class or university or learning platform.
Well, I'm just thinking as well, it's what an incredible output from a class. Let's just say I took, I'm thinking of a more advanced class where you're out of sort of the core requirements class, and you're really into the meat of your subject, and you come out with a book that you wrote with your class. This is a great thing to go to an employer. This is a great thing to go, to other colleagues in your industry and say, hey, look, actually we produced this, or I was an author, and that's a huge credential. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really nice. And actually, even if you take a topic that's been chewed on a lot, like let's say the 7 habits of an effective manager, it's a list of 7 things. If you would write a book about it, it would be a different book than if I would write a book about it, because you use different examples. You use different storytelling. You use details from your own life and experience, from your clients, from the people you know. So each of us would write a completely different book on the same topic. And that's also where a student's personality comes out. Their hobbies, their background, their interests. So I think it would be really interesting to do this with students, but also for each teacher or professor for a certain topic, they could write their own textbook for this topic, which would be completely different from the official one. It would have the basic information, but the way it's presented is completely different.
Is there any danger in voice? Like, I'm just thinking there's a class, it would be difficult in a seminar class. Let's just say there's upwards of 100 students in a seminar class. So let's put that aside for a second. But let's even just take sort of your typical 25, 30 person class. And there's a divide, we divide these chapters up, you're going to have some people who maybe, they choose the language, first of all, right? My mind always defaults to English, but gosh, what if we're all writing in Spanish, or we're writing in Dutch, or we're writing, whatever it is. And then, you have sort of just sort of different author voices. Is that, in your mind, is that part of the mosaic, or is that something that you then have to use the professor as an editor, or what would you do in that situation?
Well, it depends. You can use the different voices, and then you also have to emphasize that each chapter has a different voice because of these choices that have been made. If you want it to become like one book in one tone of voice, that's also an exercise for the students. Maybe the English teacher or the literature class can help with that, to make sure that they use the same tone of voice, or you can set some rules and guidelines at the beginning that each chapter has to abide. So there's different possibilities. And I'm even thinking, because you were talking about the dissertation. So most of the professors have written like a really deep scientific dissertation about a certain topic.
Sure.
And it's often very interesting, but not accessible to everybody. Now, if this professor would talk about this topic to his class, he would always get certain questions, even if he talks about his topic on a cocktail party, in a cocktail party or a reception, whatever. You always get the same frequently asked questions. And I always say that's the best start for a book. The frequently asked questions you get are perfect to write a book about, because that is what your audience wants to know. So you take a topic that you're already an expert in and that you wrote about scientifically and turn it into an easily accessible book for the general audience by using the questions that people ask you.
You're triggering in my mind right now sort of a layered approach to book writing, where, especially in this, let's just say the higher education universe, right, where you've got, as a foundation, you've got that really dense dissertation book that's, as you say, it's scientifically researched, you've got all your data in there, and it's less accessible just simply because you've really got to want it in order to read something like that, right? Like, but then maybe on top of that is hey, here's your kind of introductory, what are the frequently asked questions kind of book. And, it's almost like, an introductory. And maybe on top of that, you've even got like a workbook, right? So you got like a layer cake of material that you're putting in there. And as people become interested, obviously some people are like, oh, okay, great. You answered my 3 questions, and they go about their merry way. But then, people kind of level themselves down into whatever depth they want to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there's different ways of approaching it, and also the combination with an e-course or with e-learning. So you can either start on one side or you start on the other side or in the middle, but I think they're all related. And depending on what you like to do as an author or as a teacher, or what your audience wants or needs, or if you need it for your expert status to distinguish yourself from others or to provide more value, there's different ways of going about this. But a book can have so many different forms and shapes and different approaches that I think it's just interesting to dive into if you want to distinguish yourself from the others offering e-learning.
Cool. So you mentioned it a few minutes ago here, but I'd like to just sort of ask the blunt question: why do most people fail? What are the common mistakes in writing a book? And I would love it if you would also just then translate that into, you've said it a couple of times, you put it in your course and then create a book, or create a book and then create a course. Like, which would you do? Is that really a chicken and egg conversation, or would you recommend one way or the other?
Well, let's start with the assumption that the people watching this already have a topic and they have a method or something, they already have something to share. What you do when you create an e-course is in fact the same as what you do when you create a book. You start by creating a framework. Even one step before, I call my method reverse writing, and I always start at the end. I start by the back cover of the book, which is the executive summary of your e-course, of your book, which has a summary of your idea. It is a sales material to your readers, and it has a promise to your readers. After reading this book, after doing this e-course, you will be able to, and it gives a result. And then, of course, you have a process or a method that you describe in the book. If you start by that and you post it, you share it, then you already get feedback. Is there a need for this topic, whether it's a book or an e-course? What audience is interested? What questions do they ask? So that's always the first step, to test your topic and your angle to see if there's interest. If there is interest, you can translate this executive summary, your back cover, to a structure, an outline. If you promise the 23 steps to something, then you will probably have 23 chapters or modules. If your book is about a certain process, then you may have before, during, and after. And then your book or e-course will have 3 parts. And I think if you create this structure and you decide what needs to be shared in each chapter, you just put bullet points, then whatever you're going to do later, you already have the complete structure, the framework for the sharing of your knowledge. And some people like to sit down and start writing then. Others would like to talk about it. So if you talk about it, if you give a lecture about it, or a presentation or a workshop or an e-course, you could record it and have it transcribed and could have that turned into a book. Or you could do it the other way around. If you like writing, you start writing And then later you can either make an audio recording of it, or you actually share that same knowledge in an e-course. So it depends on a person, but I think creating that structure first and testing your idea before you actually start developing it, that's the big secret. And that's what I teach in my reverse writing courses.
So what, map that onto the higher education universe for me, or even the low, the K through 12 universe, where, you know what, you have to take this, introductory to social studies kind of course, or or like I said, physics 101, where the book's already written and the sort of the topics are already there. Do we just use that same structure and then, like you said, record the lectures, or well, how would you spin that out to make it unique for that professor?
Well, if the content is already determined, then of course it's all about form. So you can say, okay, we have this social studies curriculum. And of course, there are certain requirements, but what we are going to do in this class is we are going to write a book or create an e-course as a class about this course. So we take each of the topics, I explain the theory as a teacher, and you as a student take it and make it into a new content module. Either you write something, you record a video where you take the information and give your own examples and tips and how do you say, implement it into real life scenarios.
All right.
And
Awesome.
I think the students nowadays, and even before nowadays, kids and students are not made to sit and receive information without processing it. And this way of processing information really makes sure that it lands. And again, the outcome is something visible that you can also use as a promotion, as a publicity. The students will like it more. They will want to take your other courses. I think it's interesting to experiment with that. I don't know how much room there is in the general education structure to do something like this. But I think provided that the students learn what they have to learn, then anything extra is just a bonus, right?
Yeah, for sure. If there's anything that we've learned over the last 8 months here, or at least, through 2020, is that the norms have been shattered. And so all of the opportunities, or any new opportunity to create student engagement, we know this is one of the biggest topics in the e-learning universe, is like, how do we create student engagement? And any one of those opportunities needs to not only be considered, but it also needs to be tested and see if it works, right? And I love this opportunity of writing a book with your class. I already have 10 ideas about what needs to be done there.
Yeah,
but that's just that's just my evil plan, on the entrepreneurial side. One thing that I'm really interested in is, you've written 30 yourself. You've worked with hundreds of people to do this. What are the common mistakes, other than, having structure? Like, where do people run into roadblocks? What are the excuses that you hear, and how do you get over those as the no excuse lady?
Well, one of the mistakes that most people make is they start writing. They're enthusiasts. They think, oh, yes, I'm going to do it. And they take off. And then at some point they get stuck. And then they have to go back and rewrite. They have to restructure and rewrite. And that's horrible. And that's where most people lose interest. That's why this structuring is so important. And of course, there's excuses. There's excuses for any big project. And we know them all. We use them all. I use them too. I don't have time. I can't do it. I don't have experience. What if it doesn't work? What if it works? Etc., etc. The time excuse is valid because we're all busy. And that's why it's important, if you want to write a book, to do it efficiently and not, just try out different things and then get stuck and have to stop. We don't have the time or the energy for that. And if you structure it well, and you actually plan your writing, not like I'll write when I have time, which is never,
right,
then
sure.
It's very possible. And my system also helps you, after you set up the structure, to follow your creative energy instead of having to follow the page numbers and making it feel like work. If you can follow your energy and do a little bit here and a little bit there, then it becomes more intuitive and more fun to write, and it feels less like work.
After you've created that structure, it's kind of dawning on me. Let's just say that you're really happy with your outline. Can I write chapter 7 and then chapter 2 and then go back to? Is that have you done that way?
Yeah, even within chapter 7, you can work on bullet number 4, and then you think, I have this example for, the end of chapter 2, and let me write something in the introduction. And so you go crisscross through your document because you already know what fits where. And that's really what the people I work with give me as the biggest feedback, is that they can follow their energy instead of the page numbers.
Hey,
And writing is a creative process. Whether you write something scientifically or something like a fiction book, it is a creative process. But if you don't put up the structure first, then you have to keep like one eye on the structure and one eye on the creative process, and that doesn't work. You have to let your brain, go completely in this direction and then completely in that direction. And it's a really fun process to observe as well.
So I hope this isn't a curveball question, but are there any specific either processes, technologies, or anything that you are using right now or that you know of that have been recommended to you for sort of immediately translating that book into an e-course or into a learning management system or vice versa? Are there any sort of hacks, tricks, tips, processes that you've used?
Well, what I personally use, I use the software Scrivener for structuring. So in Scrivener, I create several chapters or modules, and then I put content in, and then I start writing. While I'm writing the book, I'm already recording the modules for the e-course. And as the book is being edited, I'm sending it to a translator to translate it into English. And then while the book is being translated, I record the English e-course.
I see.
And then while I'm doing this, I'm having somebody take all the examples and the theory out of the book and create the workbook in 2 languages. So once you get into this process, there are moments where you have to wait for other people to edit or the design or whatever. And then you can, take the next step with the content that you already have, because the structure is the same. The content is the same. And you can apply it to different forms and different processes. And some things you have to do yourself. Some things you can outsource. So I have a massive production, a massive harvest with, well, I wouldn't say minimal effort because it is a lot of effort, but at least the process is very streamlined.
Super cool. What am I not asking you about writing a book right now? And so I'm lucky enough, I've written a couple of them myself. I know that I'm a great believer in the structure principle that you're putting out there. And obviously if you don't schedule it, it doesn't happen, right? You can't, this has to become a priority and you just put it on your calendar like you would any other meeting. What other things, like where's the magic or where, what are the pieces that I'm not asking about?
Well, the other big mistake that many authors make is they only communicate about their book when it's ready. And then it's too late because the journalists have already written, their magazines 3 months ahead, their podcasts are already planned, the TV programs are already filled, and you don't have any experience in communicating about your book. So my tip is to start communicating about your book as soon as you start writing, as soon as you have the back cover ready. Maybe even have a cover designed before you start writing. So you can publish that as well. Ask for feedback, get ambassadors, get, people who want to be involved in your book. And as you practice communicating about your book, not only about your book, but especially about the topic, the frequently asked questions, the do's and don'ts, the how-to, etc., you become more visible and you get more followers who are actually interested in buying your book. So when it's finished, you communicate that the book is available. And after you publish it, that's actually the third stage. You keep on communicating about your topic to be visible, to be seen as the expert, to keep helping people who want to learn how to deal with this topic. So the biggest mistake is to only start communicating when your book is ready, or not communicate at all, like a good book sells itself.
Right.
That's not true.
Fantastic. Esther, this has been a fantastic conversation. I end every one of these conversations with the same question. What are you looking forward to over the next 6 to 12 months? Is there a shiny new object for you? It's probably some new destination that you're going to. Is there a new, book topic that you're looking forward to? What are you looking forward to coming down the pipe, in 6 to 12 months that you might want to tell everybody about?
Well, I'm leaving to South Africa in a few days, which is great. I'm going to spend part of the winter there, but I'm also very much looking forward to finishing the English e-course that I just recorded and the English book that's just been translated on how to write a book.
Oh, right
And
on.
I even created a checklist for your listeners or anybody else who's interested in writing a book with those 10 steps and some explanation to see if you can use it for your education, for your promotion, for your expertise. Because as you may have noticed, I'm pretty passionate about writing a book and sharing your passion. So I would love to help any listeners who want to take the next step and see if it's something they could do too.
Fantastic. We're going to include that checklist here in the podcast down below in the blog post. Esther, thank you so much for your time. I wish you all the luck and good. I hope that you have a happy winter down in South Africa.
Happy
I
winter.
hope that we'll get to talk to you again soon.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the e-learning podcast. If you like what you've learned today in this episode, I encourage you to either follow us or subscribe to us on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube. And please do share this episode with one or two of your colleagues or friends. Also, I just want to remind you that you can level up your online learning game with all of the information that's available at the eLearning Success Summit. You can get your free ticket at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And finally, you can also stay up to date on everything that's important, all the news and the resources for e-learning professionals at lmspulse.com. Get our free newsletter by just going to lmspulse.com today. Thanks again.